We have some absolutely huge news that's coming very soon. This will all be announced officially tomorrow, but we are talking about the new Lumix S1R Mark II. Yes, it's finally happening. The S1 lineup is getting a refresh. Here are some pictures that have leaked of what this camera actually looks like, just a little bit larger than the Lumix S5 Mark II. I actually kind of prefer that smaller, medium-ish size camera body compared to the original S1 lineup. I felt those are kind of large, but I have, I don't have the biggest hands either. So you can see kind of here the S1R Mark II. We've got CF Express Type B and SD card slots. On the other side, we've got mic input, headphone, obviously, USB-C for charging and recording via SSD. We're getting to the point, though, where I think these flagship cameras ought to have two USB-C ports, arguably even three if you wanted to ditch the HDMI and do some kind of USB-C HDMI. But regardless, we do have full-size HDMI. And one of the coolest things about the S1R2 is the amazing flippy, floppy, twisty, twirly screen. Yes, we can flip it all the way around, do a selfie video. We can tilt it up and kind of center shoot from the hip. It's so nice. These screens should be standard on every camera nowadays. There was a period of time where the back LCD was fixed. If you remember all the way back to the days of the Canon 5D Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV, where we had the fixed screen on the back, and everyone said, well, that's the best way to do it. It's most durable, it's most reliable. And then finally, everyone kind of caught on that, yeah, no, we want flip screens. And now we have them even better, where they're this just amazing, all the options you could ever want in terms of flipping up, flipping to the side, flipping around. It's awesome. One thing you should note, though, here is that on the kind of that left-hand dial, you can see the photo icon, the video icon, and the S&Q icon. So this is moving the main dial on the top of the camera. Let's see if I can get a view of that here, if we've got one. So the main top dial, we've got our M, S, A, P, all the custom modes, but that's really it. There used to be the video mode on that right-hand top dial that is now moving. I think maybe for the first time on a Lumix camera. I don't, maybe the S1 lineup had it this way as well, and they just kept with it. But I'm so used to cameras like the S5, the S9, the GH7, the G9, the GH6. For the longest time, video has been on the top right dial. So that'll be a little bit interesting for me to get used to having it over on the left-hand side. Now that I'm thinking about it, that might be very similar to the original S1 lineup. So if you had one of the S1 cameras, the S1, the S1R, the S1H, that first generation that came painstakingly forever ago, we've been waiting a long time for this, but we've got record button on the front, obviously full frame, big sensor right inside. Let's get to the specs, because I think that's where people are going to be really, really excited. Here we've got a new 44 megapixel high speed sensor, whatever that means. We're going to find out more details tomorrow, I'm sure. 40 frames per second in electronic shutter, very impressive. 10 frames per second in mechanical shutter, 8 stops of image stabilization. And if you know Lumix, you know that their stabilization is some of the best, probably arguably is the best, but maybe it depends on who you're asking. We've got 176 megapixel high res with sensor shift handheld by combining 8 images. This works really, really well on the Lumix cameras I've used it on. And to imagine a 44 megapixel sensor stacked with 8 images all in camera, you can do it raw, JPEG. It's really cool if you need that ultra high res photography. We've got a 5.76 megapixel OLED viewfinder, a 1.5 second pre-capture, very helpful for those moments that you don't necessarily know exactly when they're going to happen. And we've got, for the first time, 8K 30 frames per second in a Lumix body. Huge, awesome, incredible. And we've got this 8.1K open gate will be released later with a firmware update. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this, where they announce a camera with all these bells and whistles, but they save some for later and they tell you, oh, it's coming in a firmware update. Thankfully, Lumix has a pretty good track record. In fact, a great track record for amazing firmware updates, great support for their cameras, something like the S5 Mark II that just had a recent firmware update. We got hybrid zoom. Yes, it's an awesome feature on the S5 Mark II. So glad it made its way there. But we do have 8K open gate coming to the S1R Mark II later with a firmware update. Hopefully that's within like a month or two. I do believe this is going to be shipping in March, so very soon. No full confirmation on that yet, but we will see. We've got 4K 120 without crop. I skipped over that one. So 4K 120 without a crop from a full frame 44 megapixel sensor. I wonder how they're doing that. Are we getting some kind of pixel binning? What's the trade-off here? What's the gotcha? Because for as great as these specs sound, I'm sure there's going to be something, and we're going to get to that. Some of my pressing concerns or worries or things we really got to keep an eye on, because they're going to tell you the best features. They're not going to highlight any limitations or restrictions. So you got to keep an eye out for that. But these do look very impressive compared to what arguably on the market, an equivalent camera would cost you $1,000 more than that, because we are getting down to the price here. The recommended price of $3,600 US. It's going to vary by region wherever you're at, but the equivalent flagship camera from Canon, from Sony, will probably cost you $1,000 at least more than what Lumix is offering. And these specs are quite impressive. So let's keep going. 6K ProRes RAW HQ internal recording. We're getting ProRes RAW internal recording. I know some of you are fans of B-RAW, and you can still do that, I believe, on the S1R Mark II with some kind of external RAW recorder like the Video Assist from Blackmagic Design, but we're getting ProRes RAW internal. Fabulous. Can't wait to test it out. We've got internal RAW video recording for ProRes 422 HQ. We've got ProRes 422 plus proxy recording. I'm so glad they added the proxy recording via some firmware updates to things like the S5 Mark II. We now have proxies built right into these bodies. I'm glad Lumix is keeping that as a standard. You can also record on an external SSD via USB-C. The downside there being you can't charge via USB-C in that scenario. Maybe we can have some kind of dongle attachment where charging and recording. I'm not sure. I'll have to test it out, but it is a slight limitation to only have one USB-C port if you want to record externally to SSD, but also charge the camera, which I always favor charging. And if we're getting internal recording, raw to CF Express Type B, I don't know who would want the external SSD, but hey, maybe that's part of your workflow and you need it. We've got frame markers. Obviously, Lumix is known for the incredible frame markers built right in. They adapt. They're responsive to any aspect ratio you're recording. If you're shooting open gate, you're shooting 16:9, you have these incredible frame markers built right into the display that can obviously be monitored externally. If you're not using frame markers, you don't know what you're missing. And Lumix is oddly one of the few companies that lets you do that easily and seamlessly in the camera. We've also got 32-bit float audio. I'm curious, is that internal? It doesn't say it's internal, so I'm going to assume that's with the XLR2 adapter. Unfortunately, you got to get the extra box, rig it to the top of the camera. But, regardless, it's a nice that they've kept support for that XLR2, and it's not just only for the GH7, which I believe is currently the only Lumix camera that can use the XLR2 and actually get the 32-bit float. You can use the XLR2 for other cameras like the S5, etc., but none of them support 32-bit float with it. This will be nice to get another camera in that lineup that can do that. We've got the multi-angle screen like the A9 III, the A1 II. Yes, like the GH7, like the GH6 before it. These flip screens are very, very nice, and I'm glad to see we're getting it on something that's arguably a more photo centered body, but still a flippy screen is useful for photo and video. It's the hybrid mentality, right? Body size, about the same size of the Lumix S5 Mark II, just a tiny bit thicker. And there are some pictures you can find of them side by side. They look very similar, but yes, the S1R Mark II is just a little bit larger. We've got weather sealed and ventilated. That is huge, because one of my concerns about this camera, when you tout these incredible specs from huge megapixel resolution, you've got 8K open gate, are we going to have to deal with any kind of restriction in terms of overheating, in terms of thermal management? They kind of missed the mark, I think, from my perspective. I know there's a lot of people who disagree and they love that it's completely sealed, but the G9 Mark II just needed a little bit more ventilation like the S5 Mark II. And hopefully the S1R Mark II sticks with that ventilation mentality where we're actually able to get these specs all the time and we don't have to be worried about overheating. I shoot in Arizona in the summer. It gets quite hot, and I love the Lumix cameras for being able to handle that challenge. Almost all of them are near perfect for shooting video in the heat, aside from, like I said, the Lumix G9 Mark II. But I'm glad to see we've got it weather sealed and ventilated. Very, very important if you want to actually get these specs reliably. Of course, we're reading all this over on lrumors.com. If you want to go read it for yourself, you can go over to lrumors.com. Great information when it comes to the L mount, L cameras, Lumix cameras especially, but also, there's other companies in the L mount alliance, so you can go check it out. We've got the red record button in front of the camera on the corner rear corner near the mount. Interesting placement. I'll see if that's comfortable. I've always just used the shutter button to record. I don't need the extra red buttons to record, but some people like that and prefer it, the shutter for photo and the red button for video. Maybe useful, maybe not. We'll see. We've got a red tally in the front and on the back of the camera. Very, very nice to have that confirmation if you need it. And again, price $3,600, announcement February 25th, tomorrow, 1 to 2 p.m. London time. So stay tuned. We've got tons of information coming directly from Lumix. So it's not just a rumor site, posting what looks to be, all the information, all the photos. This is a little preview of the full thing tomorrow. I believe they are doing a live stream, and we can actually read through this press release here that's been translated, the text, of course, Panasonic Lumix, a Japanese company. So we're going to take a read through here real quick, just so you can give you a sense of how they're going to be talking about this camera. I will say, before I dive too deep into this, I do want to address those concerns, which ultimately are overheating. I'm glad to see that the camera's ventilated. Let's see, do we see some ventilation ports around the EVF there? I mean, up top, but I think that's microphone. Honestly, I think that's the microphone input. There's nothing on the side like on the S5 Mark II. So let's see, where do we got the vents on this thing? I'm tracking this down, really looking for these close-up details. I got it fairly zoomed in, but I'm not really seeing vents anywhere. Obviously, I'm pretty sure those top little notches are for the microphone on the EVF, actually the internal mic. So we're gonna have to see if this is truly ventilated, if that's maybe a misleading rumor, maybe it's inaccurate, maybe lost in translation a little bit. I'm not seeing vents on here, so something to be on the lookout for. Can this thing actually record? I'm looking for a camera. If you tell me you can do 8K open gate, that needs to be not like 30 minutes only for 15 minutes. Oh yes, until it overheats. And that's going to happen around, 30 minutes. I'm sick of the cameras that get to tout all the crazy specs and tell you how great they are, and yet they're susceptible to overheating. Now, Lumix historically has not been the company to do that. Usually their cameras are rock solid when it comes to thermal management, but I say usually, not always. So we really have to keep an eye out for that. And I'd also be curious to see, what is the readout speed of this new high-speed sensor? What does that mean? We got some rumors saying it is dual ISO, but how fast is this sensor? Are we going to have to deal with a lot of rolling shutter? That is a high megapixel count, 44 megapixels. How fast can it read those lines to the point where we're not dealing with a lot of skew, a lot of jello, a lot of warble? That's what the problem that some people, arguably not me, but other people have criticized the S5 Mark II for being a slower sensor, and that sensor has been used in many other cameras as well. So it's not just a Lumix only thing. This is in the S5 Mark II that Sony, I believe, that sensor is made by Sony, I believe. So it's a kind of off the shelf sensor that anyone could use, and a little slower, but we're going to see what's in this S1R Mark II, if it's fast enough to avoid some of those issues that you can get obviously from a full frame sensor. It's big, it's got a lot of megapixels, it's got to read. So I'd be on the lookout for that, as well as any other kind of gotchas or limitations when it comes to just how this thing works. Obviously, we're not getting internal NDs. I wouldn't really expect that from an R version, but I would hope, fingers crossed, like, come on, we got to get internal NDs and something like an S1H Mark II. There is another camera supposedly coming from Lumix in April that is also supposedly quote unquote interesting. So we'll really have to see what that is. If we do get an S1H Mark II, or if it's just an S1 Mark II, we're getting the R first, which is in line with kind of the Sony method of marketing and rollout. Their R versions usually tend to be ahead of the rest. If that makes sense from a price standpoint, from a feature standpoint, you could argue it either way. I kind of like to lead with the biggest, the boldest, the most expensive, the most, these are photo bodies first, right? So it does sort of make sense to lead with a photography camera. But if you look at these specs, I mean, this is obviously a video camera as well. We've got 2 record buttons, we've got tally lamps, we've got all sorts of video features. So you can't tell me it's a photo only camera. It's a hybrid, as all of them are these days, where you can shoot great photo, great video. But I am curious to see what that next camera from Lumix will be come April, if it is something like an S1H Mark II. Let's read through this press text real quick. Panasonic introduces the Lumix S1R Mark II, a full-frame mirrorless camera for professional photographers and videographers. They're saying this is for both, at least according to the rumors, right? This is translated. We'll see what they actually say tomorrow. But the camera has a newly developed 44.3 megapixel backside illuminated CMOS sensor and a powerful L2 processor. A lot of people were worried this was just going to be a rehousing of the Leica SL3. It looks like this is actually something new that we haven't seen before in terms of sensor tech. So we'll have to kind of keep an eye on that performance. And we go on, which together enable a high level of detail and a wide dynamic range of up to 14 f-stops. The native ISO range extends from ISO 80 to 51,200 and can be extended to ISO 40 to 102,400. Kind of cool to see those really low ISOs. In the past, we've been limited to ISO 100 to get even lower than that 80. And granted, you're gonna take a little bit of a trade-off if you're extending down to ISO 40, but great to have that functionality as needed. We've got improved autofocus and fast continuous shooting function. Now, this is where I would, say any company is going to say, oh, they're improved autofocus, but we are using phase hybrid autofocus in the Lumix S1R Mark II. And if you've known Lumix, Panasonic, their autofocus in video has not always been the most reliable, but they've fixed that with phase hybrid autofocus. So great to see that they're continuing to implement that. And I would argue that these are the generations where that should be coming to it's a stronger use case. They've had time now to work with this phase hybrid autofocus that the Lumix S1R Mark II should arguably be the best we've seen from Lumix when it comes to autofocus. So while other companies will always say, oh, it's always improved, this is a situation where I actually believe it because it is kind of newer tech for Lumix to be using. And it's nice to see that they're continuing to push it and use it in all their newest cameras, which is always nice, right? You don't want to sacrifice anything as we move forward. We've got 779 focusing points and AI-supported subject recognition for people, animals, vehicles, and other subjects. The camera can take continuous shots at up to 40 frames per second in electronic shutter mode with continuous focus tracking. A pre-burst mode saves images before the actual shutter release so that spontaneous movements are not missed. Great for those critical moments where you can't miss a shot, and if you're a little late on the trigger, you still got it. Functions such as white balance and ISO sensitivity can be accessed directly at the top of the housing via dedicated buttons. I love the Lumix bodies. They just feel so good. The layout is so smart. Compared to holding some other cameras from some other companies, I think Lumix is some of the absolute best when it comes to just ergonomics and comfortability shooting, both photo and video. The camera has internal 5-axis image stabilization on the image sensor, IBIS, which enables compensation of up to 8 stops. In combination with a compatible lens and dual IS, up to 7 stops of stabilization are possible in the telephoto range. So that 8 stops must be, kind of for the wide end, and then we've got 7 stops at the long end if you're combining it with dual IS, that's how I read that. Maybe we'll get more clarification tomorrow. For high resolution images, the S1R Mark II offers a high resolution mode that captures 8 images with a slightly offset sensor position and composes them into a 177 megapixel file. Huge resolution. This mode is available for both JPEG and RAW images and enables detailed results without a tripod. Very, very nice. We've got, for the first time, a Lumix camera offers internal 8K video recording at 30 frames per second. I imagine maybe an S1H Mark II could be maybe 8K 60. Maybe that would be a differentiator down the line. If we do get something in April, that's another variant in the S1 lineup. If we get that H, more frames per second at a higher resolution, at a similar 8K resolution would be a nice differentiator. In addition to internal NDs, please, let's get internal NDs finally. In addition, the Lumix S1R Mark II supports OpenGate recording, which utilizes the entire sensor area in a 3x2 format for video recording in a 6.4K resolution. This offers filmmakers maximum flexibility in post-production as they can crop the required aspect ratio, 16:9, 1:1, or 9:16 later. Love that they're putting this out there in their marketing. OpenGate is not just for anamorphic, it's actually for this multi-aspect production. Keep preaching. Panasonic, we need to get more people on board with OpenGate. Panasonic has also announced a firmware update for 2025, so there's some kind of timeline there that will also enable OpenGate recordings in an 8.1K and a 7.2K format. I'm curious how what kind of binning is going on with those pixels. Obviously, if it's 8.1K, that's going to be the full sensor, but anything less than that, how are we downsampling all that data in real time? What's the algorithm? What kind of secret sauce is going on behind the scenes are we going to have any consequences for that? Or is it going to be the beautiful image video quality we know and love from Lumix? Apple ProRes RAW HQ can be recorded internally at 5.8K at 30 frames on CF Express Type B cards, or an SSD hard drive connected via USB. Raw videos can even be output to external recorders in 8K via HDMI. The Lumix S1R Mark II also offers the option of recording a proxy file with a low bit rate in parallel. Very useful. I imagine we'll have similar integration with Frame.io, camera to cloud. Very useful if you're in that kind of quick on-demand workflow. You need a quick turn of video using that Frame.io camera to cloud with those proxies. Huge time saving and efficiency for your post-production, which is what it says. This is linked to the original video and enables more efficient post-production. It does. It really does. The robust magnesium alloy housing is protected against dust and splash water and is frost-proof down to -10 Celsius. The Lumix S1R2 also offers new sensor protection. When the camera is switched off, the mechanical shutter can be closed automatically to protect the sensor from dust when the lens is changed. Very nice. I love to, whenever you open up a camera and the bare sensor is just right there, you take the lens off and you're just looking at a bare sensor. It's kind of nice to have the mechanical shutter blocking it a little bit, giving it a little bit more protection. That's nice. The camera has a 5.76 megapixel OLED viewfinder and a folding and swiveling 3-inch touch display with 1.84 million pixels. 2 memory card slots are available for storage, CF Express Type B and SD cards, UHS-2. The Lumix S1R2 is the first Lumix system camera to support Capture One tethering. Huge if you're that type of shooter, you're a photographer using Capture One. Great that we have tethering. This enables direct image transfer to a computer. In addition, the camera is compatible with Adobe Camera to Cloud, so that image and video files can be automatically uploaded to the cloud and edited there. 2 apps are available for an enhanced user experience. The Lumix Lab app, which is kind of new, and we've got, among other things, the easy transfer editing management of LUTs, to use color styles directly in the camera or on the smartphone. And we've also got a new Lumix Flow app coming that supports video productions from planning to editing and offers functions such as automatic sorting of recordings and the use of the smartphone as an external monitor. You tell me that these are just photography cameras, and yet they're full of video features as well. Truly hybrid. It's amazing the time we live in. Price and availability, the recommended retail price is $3,599 for the Lumix S1R Mark II without a lens. And then there's a kit version with the 24-105 f4 macro. So we've got some great details here. I'm sure more to come, more specifics. And let's really keep an eye out for some of those gotchas. I'm really curious. The only time we get any mention of ventilation is way down here in the leaked specs, weather sealed and ventilated. I'm curious, is this going to be a G9 Mark II situation where it's got all these great video features, but maybe we do need to wait for an S1H Mark II to truly get the ultimate performance when it comes to video out of it. But if you go look through these comments, like it's overwhelmingly positive, the amount of people who are excited for an S1R Mark II. Just to put everything into perspective for a moment, a month ago, we thought we were getting an SL3. Lumix, thank you. Everyone's very excited. Pre-order for sure. Yep, this seals it for me. Exactly the type of monster camera that Panasonic needed to come with. Tons of excitement, enthusiasm. Thank you for keeping the form factor compact. I honestly like the ergonomics of my S5 II and G9. I agree. Incredible compact powerhouse. Looks like Panasonic have made a bucket list Goldilocks camera. Perfect camera. What's good about Panasonic is they don't throw a bunch of camera bodies at you. Instead, they perfect a camera and give you constant firmware updates that will make the camera even better. True. Okay, now I want to sell my 2-month-old S5 Mark II. Almost everything is improved ergonomically. Some small little gotchas, some criticisms, but lots of people very excited. Tons and tons of feedback. Very enthusiastic for this S1R Mark II. So stay tuned. We've got more to come, I'm sure, directly from Lumix. So again, all this is rumor, speculation, not confirmed, but we'll get confirmation very shortly tomorrow on that live stream.